my beautiful friends. I hope you're having a fabulous day today. My name is Kim, and if you are interested in true crime and just cannot get enough, hit that subscribe button, and thanks again for being here with me. Today, we're continuing our journey in part 2 of our 2-part series of Gabriel Fernandez. If you have not watched the first one in my YouTube series, I highly suggest starting there, and then we'll meet you back here and pick up in the final part of this tragic case. Before we get started, I want to say this about the Gabriel Fernandez case. These kinds of cases and their tragic outcomes we hear far too often is the reason why I do these videos. I focus on the impossibly hard subject matter of not only child abuse, but the level of child abuse that is so unthinkable that a child is ultimately murdered for that reason. It is important to give a voice to the unspeakable ways in which these child victims continue to fall through the cracks of a whole entire system of society, law enforcement, the courts, and child protective services, and to make sure each one of these children receive the attention they deserve in order to prevent the loss of another precious life to untimely lessons learned too late. But before we get started, a word from our sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by Babbel. Babbel is a language learning app. What is amazing about Babbel is they use award-winning technology that has been studied to get you learning and speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Babbel's speech recognition helps you say the words correctly and improve your accent. And for whatever reason, if you decide Babbel isn't for you, which I don't think is going to be the case, you have a 20-day money-back guarantee. Living in LA, the diversity is awesome. I just absolutely love that. But notice that speaking Spanish is just everywhere. Between that and just always wanting to learn Spanish, I decided that that was the course I was going to take first. But what's nice about Babbel is you can work on multiple languages at once or change a language if you decide that one isn't working out for you or you change from going to Mexico to France or something. You can always change. Espanol isn't for you, then start speaking Italian. Oui, oui. If you have a foreign trip planned or traveling for work, I highly recommend Babbel. Navigating and learning with Babbel is easy. Their lessons are really short. You can make them as short or as long as you want to. You know, if I throw in a load of laundry and have a few minutes, I'll go in and do a few of the lessons. Or, you know, you get the kids off on the bus, then you have a few minutes. You could just fit it into your schedule whenever it's convenient for you.
Nosotros.
Nosotros.
Nosotras.
Nosotras.
Ustedes.
Ustedes.
Nosotros. Nosotras.
Nosotros. If you want to learn a new language quickly, try Babbel. You will not be disappointed. I will put my link in the description because you need to save your coins. Babbel is offering 65% off for my viewers. 65% off, you guys. Thank you so much to Babbel, and thanks to all you guys for listening. Warning, we are going to be talking about some very specific details of a gruesome criminal case with a child victim. If you are sensitive to the details, we will see you in the next one. Brace yourself, we're picking right back up where we left off in episode 1. Ready? Let's go. On May 22nd, 2013, Gabriel Fernandez's mother, Pearl, placed a 911 call because her child had stopped breathing before handing the phone off to her boyfriend, Izaro. You would think this was a frantic, heart-stopping moment of all-encompassing need to save her child, but it was as if she was reporting her cat stuck in a tree. Pearl's tone was that of a minor inconvenience. Send somebody when you can, no rush. But the first responders' tone, this was the highest level of emergency response possible. there's a child not breathing. They drove with lights and sirens on because the child had stopped breathing and needed help. Now, when first responders arrived on scene, they pulled into an apartment complex and began the hunt for exactly where the apartment was within this maze of apartment buildings. It's a needle in a haystack at the worst possible moment. A child somewhere in this complex wasn't breathing. The first responders were already on borrowed time. But wait, what's that? They realized they didn't have to search for the apartment. A 10-year-old boy, later identified as Ezekiel, Gabriel's older brother, was in the road waving them towards a certain building. It was early in the morning, and to see a child in the roadway was, just wrong, so they knew something was up. It was an apartment complex, as I mentioned, but this apartment complex was known to have a sketchy reputation. And a 10-year-old out in the middle of the roadway doing a very adult job of directing first responders to where to go to help his brother. The apartment was located up a narrow, cramped hallway on the second floor of its building. All the better to carry out atrocious acts of humanity. The first two responders, LA County firefighters, on scene entered the apartment and were directed to the unconscious body of Gabriel. He was not breathing, and although the 911 dispatcher had instructed Pearl's boyfriend, Azaro, as to how to apply CPR, it was clear that he was not doing chest compressions or rescue breathing on the child when they entered the apartment. Gabriel had blood on his face. Izaro, who claimed to have done CPR, did not. So if he was doing it, it would have transferred on him, but it didn't. The firefighters stepped in and began to work on Gabriel with rescue breaths as they began to assess what might have caused the little boy to go into cardiac arrest. It's their job to start to put together the medical clues to conclude what could have contributed to the medical crisis that they were currently dealing with. And what did they find? Gabriel's ankles were swollen. His left palm was burned. Those distinct arch lacerations, were they bite marks or suspicious spoon burn marks? Gabriel was bruised head to toe. Depressed skull fracture. He had little holes all over his body as if he were shot with a BB gun. The more you looked, the more you saw. One of the firefighters says, "It was just unbelievable." Unbelievable, the prosecutor later asked. Why would you say that? The amount of damage inflicted to the child. It was unbelievable what they were seeing. And if that wasn't enough to have to pay close attention to what they were also acutely aware of this growing need to pay attention to, was Pearl and Izaro. Immediately, all first responders noticed that Pearl and Izaro did not seem upset. Grief, I know, is expressed in different ways when it is strictly just grief. But when you mix in being guilty of a crime, or in this case, many, many crimes, and the need to conceal damning evidence is now out of your control, things start to get messy fast. For the condition Gabriel was in, Pearl and Izaro's behavior didn't seem to be consistent with the level of severity of my general impression of the patient. Think about a normal, loving family would react to their child going into cardiac arrest. Think about how frantic they would be at the thought of their child being so close to dying. Think about how gut-wrenching, heartbreaking that would be. Should be. As for Pearl and Izaro, they were not acting like normal, loving parents at all. As a matter of fact, let's review how they were acting. In the words of one of the firefighters on scene, they were acting suspicious, nervous, concerned for themselves, argumentative, standoffish. They were acting like they had so much to cover up, most importantly, their own asses. And that is the only way in which they were behaving with consistency. As parents, they did not love or want this child and were not facing the problem of having left evidence to support exactly how they felt and treated him. Pearl kept asking about her daughter Virginia and her other son Ezekiel and her cats. Lots of questions about her cats, but never asked about Gabriel or what was happening to him. She never asked where he was or where he was being transferred to, because if she avoided eye contact with the horrendous crimes you knowingly participated in, maybe they'll just go away. Isn't that right, Pearl and Izero? The only concern she expressed was for her cats. She was concerned that they would be left in the apartment alone in a cage. I have no words. The paramedics reported that Pearl and Izero appeared to be arguing with each other. They were saying things like, Gabriel is dirty, he hits himself, he's a liar, no matter what, he's going to lie to you. Mind you, he's not breathing, not talking at all, but he is going to lie to them? That's their concern? So blatant and disgusting. One more time, Gabriel was not breathing. As appalling as Pearl and Izero's behavior was, that wasn't the first statement they said to first responders. No, it was this. He's also gay. In what world would that make a difference in that point in time? Well, that makes all the difference. He's gay? Wrap it up, everyone. He's gay. We're done here. What the... No, so ignorant. Both Pearl and Izero declaring Gabriel as being gay was one of the first things they said to first responders, and it was said as an explanation. You understand, right? He was gay. As if that explained it all. He's gay, he deserved to be beaten to the point of death for that reason alone. It's his fault. Your son is dying, but your statement is he's gay. Make sense of that, because I cannot. When first responders realized that Gabriel was not going to be revived easily on scene while laying naked on the floor of this dingy apartment he had to call home and needed to be transported to the hospital. As they gathered up Gabriel on a gurney to wheel him rapidly in the waiting ambulance, neither Pearl nor Izero made any indication that they would join Gabriel in the ambulance. In the end, Gabriel rode alone without a loving parent by his side with the EMS personnel. And that was probably a blessing to finally get him away from Pearl and Izero. Back at the apartment, disbelief spread through the emergency responders that remained at the scene. But when you think about it, when there is a level of unconcern, when there is a lack of love in their own child, it makes sense. Gabriel was a problem to them only. Also, this pesky problem of being present around medical and law enforcement professionals that know when things are amiss. And Pearl and Izero were now in the middle of an all-star team of pros that know the difference between a kid falling down versus child abuse to the point of probable death. Once at the hospital, a team of medical experts did all they could to bring Gabriel back whole again. But it was too little too late. Too many people had failed Gabriel, and it finally caught up to him. As the security guard who tried to help Gabriel said, death had him by the hand. Indeed, it did, sadly. Gabriel was kept on life support for 2 days until May 24, 2013, when he was taken off life-sustaining equipment and was pronounced dead. The cause? Blunt force trauma and malnutrition. I'm intentionally not including the horrific photos. We all have our limits, and it doesn't add value to the story. So please, if you want to see him in the hospital, the images are online to look up. They're honestly heartbreaking, to put it mildly. But Gabriel was finally at peace. All around him, a storm was brewing of people who would now be held accountable for all they did or did not do for this child now lost. After Gabriel was declared dead due to suspicious circumstances that looked like horrendous abuse was the cause, an autopsy began. And this autopsy took 2 days. to document all of the injuries they found, the more they realized just how serious this case was. In regard to the obvious head injury Gabriel had sustained, his brain was found to have a subdural hematoma, or in other words, bleeding inside his brain caused by blunt force trauma. Gabriel's stomach contents were found to contain a hard, gritty material that looked like sand and felt like kitty litter. Gabriel's thymus gland, located inside his rib cage in front of his throat area, appeared to be highly affected. According to the medical examiner, in a child of 8 years old, it should be a large, plump, soft gland and weighs about 35 to 50 grams, sometimes even over 100 grams. Gabriel's gland was barely even there. It was shriveled thin, weighed only 10 grams, caused by stress atrophy due to the severe emotional and psychological stress for a long period of time, meaning months of systemic level of progressive torture. We do know that they only had him for 8 months. And this was just the beginning, because there was just so much more that had been inflicted on Gabriel, and so many that turned the other way when their help was desperately needed for Gabriel. But don't you worry, they're all about to be called out loudly with the start of the trial of the murder of Gabriel Fernandez, starting with the social workers. The first line of defense against child abuse in this case was LA County. The LA County social workers, to be specific to Gabriel's case. When we look at Gabriel's case, it should have been considered a straightforward one. There were visible injuries in multiple reports of various outcries by many people and by Gabriel himself. These social workers' overarching mission was said to be to help families, help children. They don't want to see a child die. Every one of them should be able to say with abundance of confidence, I never saw it coming, because they absolutely did everything they could for the children they were assigned to protect. That was not the case here. The mismanagement of Gabriel's case started with a caseload any given social worker was assigned to in the LA County Department of Child and Family Services. Each social worker, on average, would have about 30 cases. Sometimes it got up to 38. The social worker supervisor had a unit of approximately 6 social workers, and the supervisor, in turn, would be responsible for the actions of their employee and their decisions in regards to up to 250 to 300 cases. Remember, each case is a family that has complex issues that arise when the family turns dysfunctional. Each social worker is assigned 30 cases or families that have issues that are not easily solved with one phone call or a brief meeting. And it was asked of the supervisor, how difficult is it to keep track of how many cases that your employees are handling? His response, you can't. This was the answer the supervisor directly responsible for one of the social workers assigned to Gabriel's case gave. He went on to explain, you don't know every case that you ought to be, only due to the fact that there are so many, and my workload was so immense. As for the social workers he managed, the system becomes overtaxed. No social worker should handle 30 plus cases or 30 plus families. Thinking skills become a challenge when you're overworked. And if there wasn't so much stress, then you may see those red flags, unquote. When the red flags are finally seen, it seems that the decision to remove a child from the home is influenced by the main guiding principle, which explained by a retired LA County Department of Child and Family Services employee, quote, taking a child away from a parent is a last resort. It's very traumatic to remove a child. The key is to preserve the family as best as we can. The argument will be that the child is always better off if they can be kept in their family's home, even under not ideal circumstances. And it's this kind of philosophy that can and does result in a fatality of a child. There were studies done that when a child is left in a dysfunctional home versus a child that is taken to a foster care home. The dysfunctional home in which they live yields better results versus foster care yielding criminals. Not my opinion, statistics. In the case of Gabriel Fernandez, the social workers seem to be guided by the philosophy of family unity above all else. And because of that, the system is broken because it's based on the wrong premise. These particular social workers were basing their decisions on the family preservation philosophy, and this guided them in how they carried out their jobs by preserving families. But we don't strengthen families when we ignore obvious warning signs and letting things continue to escalate. In this case, if you took just what they knew and what was documented by those very social workers, they certainly had enough to do more. The social workers and the supervisor would say, we didn't think this was the best interest, but the policy from the top was to leave Gabriel with his parents, if at all possible. Well, if at all possible means if the child is not in danger, is safe. So we know that Gabriel was not safe in the home, as proof was readily apparent in the visible injuries Gabriel chronically had for the world to see. This then begs the question, what happened? If there was overwhelming proof that Gabriel was unsafe in his own home, why wasn't he removed? One expert in the Gabriel Fernandez case in a subsequent trial answered this very question by saying, bureaucracies tend to function to preserve themselves and those with power. So if those of us try to indicate there are problems, then we become the problem, the threat to them. And they do what they can to maintain status quo, to preserve the institution at all cost, at the expense to the individuals like the kids and families. And in this case of the social workers tasked to keep Gabriel safe, a retired DCFS social worker summed it up sadly in this way, quote, as long as you're involving humans in the process, you're going to have mistakes. How serious are the mistakes? So she's asking a question and answering it, just to be clear. She would answer, this was the most serious mistake that could have been made. Can it be repaired? She would answer herself, no, it cannot be repaired. Can it be redeemed? No, it can never be redeemed. These people have to live with this for the rest of their lives. After Gabriel's death, LA County Department of Children and Family Services was publicly called out, and an internal affairs investigation was initiated as a result. When the social workers were interviewed by internal affairs after Gabriel's death, the social worker initially assigned to Gabriel's case, the very one that was the recipient of Gabriel's teacher's many child abuse reports of him being beaten with a belt and the buckle made him bleed, being shot in the face with a BB gun, and those mysterious bloody scab marks all over his scalp, that one was asked, were there any main issues that were the focus of the family? This is how she answered. He was acting up in school. He was angry, was rude to his teacher. Are you kidding me? Friends, this is just infuriating that this is how she answered. An abused child is struggling with everything in their orbit. There is no safety in their world. How is he supposed to act? If he's actually was acting in that manner described, an even better question. The IA investigator, IA meaning internal affairs, where was the information coming from that he was so rude or acting out so much? The social worker. Those things were told to me by Mom, the IA investigator. Did you ever talk to the teacher or the school to get additional information on how he was doing at school? The social worker. No, I did not. Can you even believe this answer? This social worker never even talked to the teacher who made the child abuse reports, who had firsthand knowledge and even had pictures of his injuries. She never even talked to the teacher. When the social worker supervisor was interviewed for this IA investigation, he was asked, since the case had originally come in for physical abuse, had any verification been obtained that there were no new incidents of physical abuse or aggressive discipline? His reply, it was never brought to my attention by the social worker, the eye investigator asked. So, in terms of asking the specific question, because you want your workers to ask the specific questions, did you ask your workers specifically if she had assessed whether or not there was ongoing physical abuse? The social worker supervisor would answer, I can't remember the details of a lot of the conversation, but no. The third social worker had a part in Gabriel's DCF case and failed him miserably. Quote, there were never any mentions of physical abuse. That wasn't what the case was about. The case was about neglect, this third caseworker would say. I was there. I did my job. I gave the referrals. I was sitting there with the family and no one ever said anything. No one, not the children, not the other older children, not the neighbors. No, nothing said anything to me about there was physical abuse going on. And there were never any bruises. Just to make sure you are fully outraged about this third social worker statement in her internal affairs interview, she outright lied in her verbal and recorded statement. And here's the proof. 3 years earlier, that same social worker said in a recorded interview, I saw the black eye. I can't remember the explanation. I saw that he had a BB shot, and I was told that was a kid in the apartment complex. Implying another kid in the apartment complex did that to him. So she's recorded saying all this, but it's just a neglect case, covering her own butt. The IA investigator, when you saw marks on him, did you ever complete a body chart? The social worker's reply, no. The IA investigator says, are you aware there are body charts to mark? The social worker, yes. After this particular social worker's reporting was investigated, it was revealed that what she was writing was flat false. Reporting false information should be prosecuted. Just my opinion. At minimum, you are forging documents. That is a crime. She wrote that the children, including Gabriel, all attended school regularly. But according to the teacher, he had disappeared for almost 13 days at one point. What about that? The social worker said that the family was improving and that Gabriel's risk was diminishing, and that she spoke to Isaro and he deemed him as a pleasant person. The social worker spoke to Isaro once. This is also the same social worker that ultimately closed Gabriel's case after having found no reason to investigate it. But get this, on a recorded phone call interview, this social worker is crying as she said, I didn't have any control over what goes on in that family. To confirm, they did and do have control on what goes on in families. It is the whole reason for their being, to make sure that kids are safe, live healthy, fed. In other words, these social workers conducted a shallow inquiry when they were supposed to do so much more. One of the social worker was even described as being a gullible individual that was manipulated by Pearl Fernandez time and time again, as I believe she was a master manipulator. This same social worker was supposed to complete paperwork charting the various injuries, and initially she did that when Gabriel's teacher reported that she told him that he had been hit on the rear end with a belt buckle. But after that, the social worker quit completing the paperwork, as if dismissing that those subsequent injuries as not needing to be recorded because he fell off his bunk beds or his bike, or just lying about it as reported by Pearl and Isaro. The prosecutor went on to say bluntly, there were affirmative things the social workers and their supervisor did to keep the kid in an abusive environment, and it was quite frankly foreseeable that the kid was going to die. The district attorney's office looked at everyone in the social services division that had anything to do with it and their jobs that they signed up to do. Humans make mistakes, right? But when the result is a child being abused to the point of chronic torture over a long-term period of time, and that was overlooked or missed by many, many trained professionals. Brace yourself. We're not done with the long list of those who failed Gabriel. So the teacher calls in and reports that he's come to school saying he had been shot with a BB gun, and the social worker walks away from that. There's chunks of missing hair, a shaved head with scabs, and not typical child injuries. As the allegations that were made were explained away firsthand by Pearl and Isaro, and then by the social workers, and then by the LA County Sheriff's Department. And oh boy, did the LA County Sheriff's Department try to keep this very, very quiet, that they too had been forced to open up an internal affairs investigation into many deputies that had made horrible mistakes concerning Gabriel. And they succeeded in covering this up for a little while and keeping their misdeeds under wraps until the trial of Gabriel began. During the trial, while the defense was examining a witness, they mentioned that the sheriff's department did an investigation and they wrote a report. And the prosecution knew nothing about the investigation. Now, mind you, the prosecution, their partner is the police department. The police are out to get bad guys. The prosecution is trying to send them to jail for said crimes. So they're on the same team. So just keep that in mind. As far as the prosecution was concerned, there were no reports or investigations, right? The prosecution had no idea what info the defense had. But according to the defense, there was a full-blown internal affairs investigation pertaining to the sheriff deputies and their involvement with investigations involving Gabriel. The judge at the hearing told the prosecution, if there actually is an IA investigation, you need to go get it and turn it over. And of course, the prosecution said, if the judge orders me to do it, I'm going to go do just that. So the prosecution starts by asking around within the LA County Sheriff's Department. And everywhere I turned, he would say, either somebody didn't know or they would say they would get back to me. And they would never get back to me. And they were talking to me in a way that got him concerned. You know, that standoffish, yeah, I'll get back to you, and then crickets. He would explain to whom he was requesting the files that this is people versus Isaro and Pearl. This is the Gabriel case. Do you have the files? Kind of insinuating this isn't about me. This isn't a personal thing. This is about Gabriel and bringing the criminals to justice. Why am I getting the runaround? He would ask. The prosecutor then reached out to a friend who was an LA County Sheriff's that worked within the LA County Sheriff's Department as a deputy, and they confirmed that there was indeed an IA file. It was hundreds of pages, and that they interviewed numerous people. As it turned out, LA County Sheriff's Department of Internal Affairs decided to conduct an investigation and not notify the prosecution or anyone else of their work for 3 years, from 2013 to 2016. So the defense attorney knew about it and the defendant knew about it, but the prosecution did not know anything about it. So the prosecution proceeded to try to get a hold of this said file by reaching out to many, many people within the sheriff's department to turn over the file, and the response was nothing. So we would send more emails, he would say, reiterating that the judge is ordering that these files be turned over, and still nothing. So then we would send another round of emails citing that this is discovery. They are in violation of the Constitution, that they were required to turn the files over, and still we received no communication or the files from the sheriff's department, he would say. If it looks like a cover-up and smells like a cover-up, but what was worse was what the prosecution said next. So not only was I shocked that the files were not being turned over, but also scared. What if this caused a major problem in seeking justice for Gabriel? They need to fix the problem. Upon judge's orders, and because it was the right thing to do, turned into implied threats to one, the prosecutor, and his wife. As it turns out, his wife worked for that sheriff's office. The sheriff deputies were mad and also scared themselves. Whatever was in this internal affairs investigation files could mean the end of their jobs and maybe even criminal charges. And you never know what people will do when they are armed and mad and they feel like maybe they could lose their job or be prosecuted if they did something wrong, he would say. And when they still wouldn't turn over the files, the prosecutor took their own police department to court to force them to do so. And in the end, the judge ordered them to turn over the files, and they finally did. And wouldn't you know it, there was a lot of information in the files that actually helped the Gabriel case that for some reason the LA County Sheriff's Department felt that they weren't obligated to have to turn over. Most police departments that when requested to turn over information pertaining to a case when the district attorney is actively working on, they just do it. There is no drama unless the department has done something wrong and is covering up their collective butts. Because by refusing to immediately turn over the records, they are essentially broadcasting they have something to hide and also something to lose. As it turns out, those files showed that deputies were dispatched to the Fernandez home no less than 5 times in the months preceding his death, and each time resulted in a sorely lacked response that amounted to little or no investigation on their part into what we now know was a profoundly horrid child abuse case allowed to go on at the hands of both Pearl and Izero. And speaking of Izero and Pearl, their day of reckoning for all they did to Gabriel had now arrived with their trial. In the beginning stages of the trial, the court proceedings were being conducted with Pearl and Izero together in the courtroom. This didn't last long due to Pearl's outburst in court, but it did prove to be advantageous for the prosecution while it lasted. As the two defendants were waiting to be brought into the courtroom, they would be placed in holding cells next to each other. The sheriff's department wisely wired the 2 cells with listening and recording devices. One malfunctioned, but Pearl's recording device picked up her attempts to ask Izero what he told investigators. Did you talk to your lawyer? Did you tell him it was an accidental death? She would scream from her cell to his. Do you know why they got that murder charge on me? Because you said I was inside the room, and I said no, I was not there. I wasn't inside the room. That I went inside the room in the beginning but put sweats on. Then me and Virginia went to the living room. She wanted to make sure their stories were consistent. She would say, but they don't know about the torture part. They were like, how the hell did he get this? How the hell did he get that? She would go on to say, screaming from her cell to his. And you know, I was like, he admitted he fell off his fucking dirt bike. Remember that time he fell off his dirt bike? And then somehow Pearl turns the conversation in a sexual direction and had prosecutors wondering. It does speak to whether or not this chronic torturing of Gabriel was a form of foreplay for them. It's just gross. Pearl goes on to yell in Izero's cell through the wall, you should use your imagination. You remember when I was lying on the bed playing with myself and you had me on videotape? Do you remember that? But I just think this is another added manipulation on Pearl's part. She takes it that way to make him like her more, so that everything that she said prior is now validated, because do you remember that time? It's just gross. Elizabeth Carranza, Gabriel's great aunt, went on to add that sickness in people's heads where they need to see someone suffer, that was Pearl. As part of presenting witnesses in the court proceedings, Gabriel's older brother Ezekiel and his sister Virginia were also called to the stand. In this case, Ezekiel and Virginia were testifying against Pearl and Izero as witnesses, which begs the question, were they victims as well? How did they escape the chronic torturous abuse that was inflicted on Gabriel daily for 8 months straight? A family psychologist explains Ezekiel and Virginia escape from abuse is due to the family scapegoat syndrome. She goes on to describe Gabriel's family dynamic as this. The family scapegoat consists of one child, which is the subject of all the family's feelings, their shame, regret, or for whatever reason is the case, it was Gabriel as being the scapegoat. By definition, family scapegoating is a form of systematically driven psycho-emotional bullying and abuse with all the painful subsequences to body, mind, and spirit. Family scapegoating are often the targets of shaming and blaming, distorted family narratives, aka smear campaigns, and can end up rejected and discarded by those who were supposed to love them the most, their family of origin. And why does family scapegoating occur? Research suggests that family who are mentally ill or emotionally unstable, including those who have a personality disorder such as borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, are far more likely to scapegoat their own child than a emotionally healthy and stable parent. Such parents may attack their child to release their pent-up frustrations and deep feelings of abandonment, toxic shame, or self-hatred. They might engage in splitting behaviors as well. They might pit one sibling against each other to create a camp of allies. Parents that split will also tend to see one child as good, the golden child, and the other one as bad, which would be the scapegoat. I have covered many cases where the other children in the home are well taken care of with, minimal abuse, mental abuse for sure, but they're not getting the torturous physical abuse as one child. A prime example is the Collins case. I'll link it below if you want to check it out. It's just amazing how many children they had, but for whatever reason, that was another example of scapegoating. A clinical psychologist reported that Pearl has been variously diagnosed during her life with a depressive disorder, possible personality disorder, and possible PTSD, right frontal brain abnormalities from recent brain scans, in addition to having more likely sustained brain development damage from early years. She was taking drugs at 9 years old and also had alcohol abuse. She also disclosed that she was the victim of a multi-day gang rape and attempted essay by her uncle. The report did not indicate which uncle, as well as domestic violence. Her own mother hit Pearl often and reported that her mother hated her. Now, this is not an excuse for Pearl's chronic torture and eventual murder of her own child. Not at all. I am not saying that, because that does not... No, but it does explain a few things and shine a harsh light on the generational abuse that was modeled by way of first-hand horrendous treatment in which she was a victim as well. And although this is pertinent information as to one of those many possible reasons this could have happened, it still does not serve as an ultimate excuse for the choices Pearl and Izero made to lead to the death of Gabriel, as we step back into the courtroom setting to hear from Ezekiel and Virginia. So Ezekiel and Virginia's testimonies to the authorities and in the court were some of the most moving, and shocking, and also, for Gabriel's case, effective. Both described a scene of inhumanity with their breathtaking accounts. Ezekiel and Virginia began in different testimonies by describing their living situation within the small apartment they shared with their mother, Pearl, and her boyfriend. Both Ezekiel and Virginia were both given beds in the second room in the small apartment. Virginia and Ezekiel shared the same room. As for Gabriel, he was placed in a double door cabinet that they called the closet. And let's be blunt, it was a two-door cabinet in the shape of a box. When Ezekiel was asked if he remembers where Gabriel's box was, he said yes, that it was in his parents' bedroom. He told the court that Gabriel was put in the box most of the time during the day and night. Pearl and Izero would put him in the box and would put handcuffs on the door cabinet handles, effectively locking him in. When they needed him to be quiet, they would put a sock in his mouth and gag him with a bandana, which they tied around his head. When Gabriel needed to go to the bathroom, he would have to do it inside of that wooden box. And when he did so, you better believe he was punished and he was forced to clean it up. At one point, Ezekiel was asked if Pearl and Izero would also use the box to hide Gabriel. Ezekiel answered yes. Pearl and Izero would hide Gabriel from social workers when they would come over. If Gabriel was left for large periods of time in the wooden box, would be neglected in other ways as well. Was he hungry most of the time? The court would ask Ezekiel. He answered yes. I tried to give him my banana when he was in the box. When the box Gabriel was forced to live in much of his life, it was wheeled out in the courtroom and used as visual evidence for the judge and the jury to see. It was noticeably covered in yellow stickers indicating arrows of all were pointing to Gabriel's blood or other bodily fluids, telling a horrific story of what Gabriel went through in the last 8 months of his life. When asked to describe the first time Ezekiel saw something really bad happen at the home to Gabriel, he said that he saw Izero lifting Gabriel off his feet and held him against the wall with one hand on his neck, and his free hand, he repeatedly punched Gabriel in the face and his body. As for the cat litter found in Gabriel's stomach during his autopsy, Virginia said this: Izero made Gabriel clean the cat litter box, and if he thought Gabriel was not cleaning it properly, Izero would tell him to clean it right, or I'll make you eat it. Gabriel never seemed to clean it right by Izero's standards, so Gabriel was forced to go to a corner of the room and eat both the used litter and any cat feces or urine that was mixed in. Gabriel would obey the orders. He had to, Virginia said in a small voice. The prosecutor would ask, how were Gabriel's teeth knocked out? Ezekiel answered, with a bat. My mom hit him with the bottom of the bat in his teeth and they got knocked out. Was he crying? They would ask. Yes. Was he on the ground? Yes. Did they take him to a doctor or dentist? No. Ever? No. When another evidence exhibit was brought out, Ezekiel was asked in court to identify what it was, and it was pepper spray, he answered. When asked who it belonged to, Ezekiel answered, my mom's boyfriend. My mom and her boyfriend would put Gabriel in the bathtub, and my mom's boyfriend would spray him in the face with the pepper spray. What would Gabriel do, they asked. He started crying and trying to get out of the bathroom. Was he able to get out? No, they blocked the door. The prosecution then brought up the obvious issue Pearl and Izero had with the possibility that Gabriel was gay. Did the boyfriend call Gabriel gay a lot? The prosecution asked. Yes, Ezekiel would answer. Okay, friends, in regards to this ongoing theme that one of the reasons Pearl and Izero chronically tortured Gabriel, we don't know if Gabriel was actually gay, but there sure is evidence that Pearl and Izero thought he was and possibly used this as a reason to justify their actions, as witnessed by the final beating Izero gave to Gabriel, as he's calling him gay while hitting him to the point of death. And speaking of all those physical beatings Pearl and Izero subjected Gabriel to, the prosecution asked Ezekiel, sometimes Izero would put makeup on Gabriel's bruises. Ezekiel answered yes. Sometimes Izero would put Gabriel in a cold bath to try to make the bruises go away, the prosecution asked, and Ezekiel answered yes. Was Gabriel cold? Ezekiel would answer yes. Was he put anywhere after the cold bath? The prosecution would ask, and Ezekiel would answer yes, back in the box. On and on it went, the depravity of just how creative and how low Pearl and Izero would go in their single-minded torture of Gabriel. And then finally, the prosecution asked Ezekiel this. In your own words, the best you can you tell the jury what you remember happening the night of Gabriel's murder? Ezekiel answered, I just came home from playing outside and walked to the house, and I see my mom, Virginia, and Gabriel in Virginia's room. And then they were arguing about something. I can remember that my mom got mad because Gabriel was playing with Virginia's toys, and she got up and started hitting Gabriel in the face. She dragged him into her and Izero's room and then closed the door. And then I was hearing screaming and a lot of banging. When Izero was asked to identify his level of frustration and anger the night that Gabriel died, between 1 and 10, Izero answered 20. Ezekiel went on to say, and then my mother came out and I was scared. She told me to tell the paramedics that me and Gabriel were playing and that he hit his head, and that was it. The night that Gabriel died, Pearl told first responders that Gabriel and his older brother Ezekiel were running around a coffee table. Gabriel fell while they were playing. Gabriel's sister then goes on to the stand, and when she was asked about the night that Gabriel was murdered, she said, I was sitting on the edge of the bed and my mom's boyfriend was punching him. He knocked the air out of him. He fell over and did not get back up. So then they picked him up, threw him in the shower, and they kept on yelling at Gabriel to wake up. Then when he didn't wake up, my mother decided to call 911. She told me to grab a rag, and we cleaned up all the blood that was on the floor. And to all of you listening to this testimony from two kids that witnessed Gabriel's murder, I have to tell you, on the day of Ezekiel and Virginia's testimony of watching the murder of her brother, almost every last person in that courtroom was emotionally affected, except for Izero, who sat stoically with no emotion at all, even when the prosecutor in the closing argument said Pearl and Izero together hit Gabriel 20 times in the body and 10 times in the head. In regards to the night that Gabriel died, Izero told investigators in his interrogation that whether it was a lack of care and concern with no remorse whatsoever, or Izero was just completely shut down as he refused to show any emotion he might be feeling, and that lack of humanity sealed his fate. At the end of the long trial, detailing incomprehensible torture and death, Izero Agari was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. As for Pearl, once Izero's trial was over and he had been sentenced to death, Pearl had no choice but to plead guilty to all charges against her after every last bit of child-killing laundry was aired in Izero's trial. In exchange for accepting a guilty plea on all charges, the death sentence was taken off the table and Pearl was granted life in prison with no chance of parole ever. And the 4 social workers responsible for their part in Gabriel's continued abuse and resulted in death, all 4 social workers were fired from their jobs following internal investigation into the group's actions. They went to trial in fall of 2019. The unprecedented charges against them held up to 11 years in prison if convicted. So far, the social workers go free. The defense filed a motion to dismiss their case so they do not have to go to trial or appear before a jury. That much we saw in the Netflix documentaries. A 3-justice panel from California's District Court of Appeal ruled that there was no probable cause to hold the 2 social workers and the 2 supervisors on the charges related to Gabriel's death. The charges of failing to protect Gabriel and falsifying public records, according to the social workers, were dismissed. As of February 2020, Los Angeles County prosecutors are still attempting to hold the social workers accountable. As for the Gabriel Fernandez case as a whole, the judge presiding over Azaro and Pearl's trials and the punishment hearings concluded the entire sad saga by saying this: "It is unimaginable the pain this child probably endured. And from what I have heard, Gabriel was kind, loving individual who just wanted to be loved. And so you want to say that the conduct was animalistic, but that would be wrong because even animals know how to take care of their young." And specifically addressing Pearl and Izaro, he said, "I can only wish, I really do, that you both in the middle of the night, you wake up and you think of the injuries that you subjected this poor young man to, and that it tortures you. That's my wish." And Izaro sat stoically without emotion, and Pearl looked on completely and utterly unaffected. Pearl has not been a model inmate from a girl allegedly that was in prison with Pearl, stated that she got the mess beat out of her. Apparently, Pearl has just been a hot mess since she's been locked up, telling off guards, doing this, and then even ended up stealing. But karma caught up with her. She was hit with padlocks. They had to bring in the riot squad to transport her. This happened after a guard said to Pearl, "I don't know how you can sleep at night after what you did to your son." Hats off to that guard. She deserves much worse. My hope is that she is in a cell all by herself with her thoughts, and it brings her some torture that she inflicted on Gabriel. Karma is real. Good luck. Well, we went on a journey, friends, and I am glad to have you here with me as we examine this case. I have to admit that I am kind of glad that this case is over. You guys let me know what you guys think in the comments. And do you want me to cover the case that LA County Department of Child and Family Services turned right after the Gabriel Fernandez case and failed another child pretty much immediately? Should we call them out too? Let me know if you know which case that is, and I'll cover it, but I'll leave it in the comments. Thanks to all my channel members who continue to support me. Their names are on the screen. If you would like early access to new videos and decide the cases I cover next, you can do so by clicking the join button from your desktop, or there's a video in the description box on how to do it from your phone. Well, if you guys have made it to the end, you guys are rock stars, and I love you to death. There are more true crime videos in my Crimey Stories playlist if you'd like to check them out. Stay safe, my loves, and remember, if you see something, say something, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.